So I'm talking about HTML and CSS and basic web development. So my big idea was to create a digital portfolio for my photography because I want to show off all the projects I've done. The internet is now used by almost everyone around the world that has access to it, and it's a great tool to show off your work, to get yourself noticed. So I want to create a digital portfolio. I want to have it easy for people to purchase prints as well. So I took a lot of inspiration from Justin Mal's website. He's an Australian digital artist, and I've liked a lot of his work, and I got my idea of making a website where you can buy prints from, as well as use this website to show off my work as well. So I had to narrow down my focus. So I narrowed it down to HTML and then basics of CSS, HTML, and how the two link together. I wanted to create just a very basic website with a few of my pictures, nothing fancy, just to show as a practice for what I can do and to start off my portfolio. So what is HTML and how is it used? So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. As the name implies, it is a markup language. A markup language are designed for processing the definition and presentation of text. So the language specifies code for formatting. So like the general layout, and the code uses the formatting for the tags. So for example, H1 is a type of header versus P for paragraph. They display text differently. So roughly 75.9% of websites now use HTML5, which is the newest version of HTML. And it does have, although HTML does have some way in how it looks, if you have HTML by itself, it's always going to look very basic, straightforward, and plain. So this is a basic HTML file. So I use two types of elements in this, the H1 header and H3 header. So as you can see, there is a slight difference in the way text is displayed with HTML, with the markup language, but it is still very plain and boring. So the basic anatomy of HTML, the way it looks. So this is a basic HTML file. You have your HTML here, your elements here and here. These are used as like the start of class and end of the class. Anything within here is part of the HTML folder. We here have our header. This has all the information about it, such as our title. And here we have our style. This is used for CSS. I'll get to this later. Here we have the body of our HTML file. This is where most of our code is contained. Within the body, you can have separate elements such as H1, H2, but you can also have elements such as main, which has its own code inside. I'll show you more of that later in my website code. So CSS. CSS stands for Cascade Style Sheets. As the name implies, it's used for styling. So it's used to style and organize. Also, on top of stylizing, it's also used to organize web pages. There are multiple ways to integrate CSS with HTML, and I'm going to show you a few of these ways. So, first off, you can have a separate file, CSS file. In that file, you can have all your CSS code, and then you will later link it with your HTML file. As you saw in my code earlier here, we have our style. With the style, that's another way to integrate CSS. I'll show you examples right now. So this is what I use for my code. This method here links a CSS links the HTML file, which this is a picture of, to my separate CSS folder, which is picture template.css. My other method is with the style element in HTML. Anything within the style element is CSS code. Looks the exact same as my CSS looks. And the main difference is this here, we can apply my picture template to multiple different files, can have it up side by side when you're editing it. This is a method I chose to use, but the style element inside the head method also works perfectly fine. So the anatomy of CSS. This here is basic. You can set, to start off, you can set multiple different elements to the same settings, and then you can change them later. So I use this to set everything to the padding margin to 0. This is just a default, and I will change this later, as you can even see right here. As you can see, this is the change. So you have your attribute which you're changing. So in this case, I'm using font variant as an example. So you have the name followed by a colon, and then how you would like to adjust it. In this case, I want these links to be in small caps, so they will be displayed as small caps instead of normal text. Another example here is with margin left. You have your margin left followed by a colon, and then how many pixels I want to be. So in this case, I set to 10. This is then followed by a semicolon. Here is another. You can see we have dots and hashtags. This is called a class, and this is an ID. I will talk to you more about further details in the next slide. For now, I want to focus on these right here. So this is the navigation element, and this is the body element. Two elements in HTML. What you do when you're editing everything, you put your element type and followed by braces. Within here, you adjust everything. So anything within the body will be changed to this background color. Notice it's the exact same setup with the semicolon after the attribute, the full colon, sorry, to the attribute, and the semicolon after you adjust everything. You can have multiple types in class. Talk about hierarchies. For example, the body class. If I had a paragraph element which would be stored inside the body, it would automatically take this background color here. I would not have to specify that again. This is very similar to hierarchies in Java, where if you have one class higher in the hierarchy, the other classes will inherit it. It's the exact same in this. So here I showed you these classes, these top two, the classes and the IDs. So classes and IDs are used when you're changing one or certain type of an element. So I maybe want to change some of my paragraph type elements, but not all of them. I will use a class or an ID. The main difference when it comes to class or ID is the amount of memory that each use. So IDs are most often used when identifying one element, whereas a class you'd use if you're identifying it multiple times. This is mainly important when it gets to bigger, more intensive HTML and CSS files. For my example here, I use my banner class once and my subhead ID multiple times. So ideally, these would be switched. But for my program, it doesn't make that big of a difference, although it is an easy fix. So classes are identified with a period before, where ID is started with a hashtag. Everything in here is then set to the certain value. These take priority over the normal attributes changed in CSS. So for example, if I have an H2 element with the subhead and I set all of that in the separate in a separate bracket in the CSS to margin top 5 pixels, but then I have one that I call a subhead using this ID. It will then be 10 pixels instead of the 5 that I originally set it to. So this is how you use them. So this is in the HTML file. You use them as attributes. So you set the ID equals subhead. Notice how I don't have that hashtag in front? That is only in the CSS file so that CSS can determine whether it's a class or an ID. It's the exact same here where you have class equals, then open your quotation marks and add the name of the class or ID you are working with. So font families. So every computer has different types of fonts, and fonts are a very important part of how a web page looks and how everything looks. When you're designing a poster, you want to make sure you have a certain font. It's the exact same with a website. You want to make sure you have a font that suits your website. But some computers have different fonts. For example, some Macs have different fonts installed than PCs. So you can set multiple fonts in your font family. Your font family decides what font will be used. So you notice here, I do have multiple fonts. Because some computers have different fonts, it starts with looking at, for Lucidia, handwriting. If the computer finds this font, it will stop there. If it cannot find this font, it will move on to Informal Roman to find it, etc. You want to make sure you use as generic fonts as possible so that your website looks the same for every computer. Another way around this is, for example, for a banner, you can just have a picture instead of a text, although I would not recommend this. So some of my next steps is to learn how to integrate PayPal and YouTube. This would make it a lot easier for people to purchase or view video projects I do. This is also something I will find really interesting to learn. Linking to my website to URL. This is very important as right now no one can find my website, and for it to get noticed, it needs to be linked to a URL. I want to be able to create a mobile friendly version. Nowadays, lots of people have phones and lots of people use it all the time for web surfing. So it would be excellent to have it a mobile friendly version. I'd also like to have a grid size adjust the screen. Right now, my website, it works for laptops and depending on the resolution of your monitor, that's set to. But you put it on a bigger, higher resolution monitor, there's a lot of empty space. I want to be able to create algorithms that allows it to stretch and compress the grid to the needs of the screen. Many large websites use templates to create HTML files on the go as the user is navigating the website. I feel this is something that would be very interesting to learn, as it incorporates lots of different languages and techniques. Thank you.